The first 15 seconds after your paycheck lands are not a money problem, they are a command problem. Those 15 seconds decide whether your income enters your life like fuel or like fire. They decide whether your money gets assigned a job or starts looking for a place to disappear. They decide whether you are running a wealth operating system or a consumption operating system. And most people, without even realizing it, are running the wrong code. They think they have an income problem. They do not. They have a routing problem. I want you to hear that clearly, because ordinary people waste years blaming the size of the paycheck when the real damage happens in the way the paycheck is handled, the moment it arrives. A paycheck is not just cash. A paycheck is future freedom broken into installments. It is your next decade arriving in pieces. It is your retirement trying to enter your account through a small door. It is your refusal power, your emergency buffer, your future ownership, your sleep, your dignity, your margin for error, all arriving disguised as a direct deposit. And if you do not have a system waiting for it, your own brain will rob you before the world even gets a chance. That is the brutal truth. Most people do not spend because they are evil. They spend because their money arrives in an environment with no architecture, no rails, no priorities, no firewall, no defined destination. So the default code takes over, emotion gets first access, appetite gets administrator privileges, the rent gets paid somehow, the streaming subscriptions renew somehow, food appears, gas gets bought, small treats keep arriving, coffee takeout, little convenience purchases, late night online orders, things that felt harmless because each one was too small to trigger fear. That is how lives get spent, not in one dramatic collapse, in 1,000 ungoverned transactions. That is why I do not want you to think about payday as a happy event. I want you to think about payday as a systems test. The moment the money hits, your life reveals its code. If you are excited, casual, reactive, and a little entitled, you are probably running the broke default. If you are deliberate, cold, prioritized, and slightly boring, you may finally be running the wealth code. The market does not pay you for your intentions. It pays you for your structure. And structure, at the household level, begins the moment your paycheck lands. I call this the payday window. The payday window is the short period between money arriving and impulse taking control. Most people lose the battle here because they still treat income like a surprise gift instead of a capital event. They behave like children who found money in the couch. A little joy, a little relief, a little fantasy, a little release. They start mentally spending before the deposit has even settled. Their brain sees the number and immediately converts it into shoes, gadgets, dinners, upgrades, subscriptions, convenience, and emotional anesthesia. That is not budgeting. That is leakage with a smile. If you want wealth, you need a different identity. You need to stop seeing your paycheck as permission and start seeing it as raw material. Raw material does not get celebrated. It gets allocated, it gets routed, it gets assigned, it gets processed through a system that existed before the money arrived. That is what successful people do differently, and it is much less glamorous than broke people imagine. They do not have superhuman willpower. They do not wake up every payday feeling inspired. They do not rely on motivation. They simply refuse to let cash enter an ungoverned environment. That is the whole trick. A paycheck without a system becomes lifestyle. A paycheck with a system becomes capital. You need to decide which one you are building. Now let me show you the core of the operating system, because if you misunderstand this part, you will spend the next 10 years rearranging symptoms while the machine keeps eating your future. The first command in a real money operating system is not spend, and it is not even pay bills. The first command is classify. If you do not know what portion of your income is truly required to keep you alive, then you do not know how fragile you are. And most people are much more fragile than they think because they have spent so long labeling comfort as necessity that they no longer know the difference. I call this the necessity firewall. The necessity firewall separates what keeps you alive from what keeps you entertained, validated, soothed, or numb. Housing, basic food, essential transportation, utilities, core healthcare, those are real. But the mind is a liar when lifestyle is involved. A luxury car becomes essential transportation. Daily restaurant meals become impossible. To live without social maintenance. Premium subscriptions become part of modern life. Expensive coffee becomes functional survival. A gym membership you do not use becomes self-care in theory. A premium phone plan becomes productivity. This is how people build expensive myths around small pleasures and then wonder why they cannot build wealth. If you are spending more than about 60% of your take home pay on true necessities, one of two things is usually true. Either your environment is too expensive for your income, or you are lying to yourself about what qualifies as necessary. Neither answer feels good. That is why so few people do the work honestly. But until you do, you are operating blind. Take a simple example. Someone earns $75,000 a year and brings home roughly $4,750 each month after taxes. Rent is $1,800. A car payment is $400. Food is $500. They are already around 57% before the quieter leaks start showing up. Then come the ad on streaming takeout, small impulse buys, delivery fees, random digital subscriptions, a few dinners, a coffee habit that masquerades as productivity fuel. Suddenly the person says, I do not know where my money goes. Yes, you do. You just do not like the answer. The answer is that your life has no firewall. Everything gets access. Every appetite gets treated like a bill. And when everything has access, the future gets nothing but leftovers. That is why the necessity firewall matters. It is not there to make you feel deprived. It is there to stop false urgency from impersonating survival. The future only gets funded when present comfort loses its voting rights. Once you know your true necessity percentage, the rest of the system becomes visible. Now you know whether you are living in a survivable structure or a predatory one. Now you know whether the problem is income, housing, transport, habit, or ego. Now you know where the knife has to go. And if that number humiliates you, good. Humiliation can be useful if it drives redesign. The next layer of the operating system is less emotional and more brutal. Before you talk about freedom, investing, or getting ahead, you need to keep your financial reputation from rotting. I call this the credit gate. Your credit score is not your character, I know that, but the system treats it like a shorthand for whether you can be trusted with time. Time is what credit really is. The lender gives you time. The landlord studies whether you have honored time. The bank prices your access to time. The employer in some cases may even read your relationship to time and obligation as a crude proxy for reliability. That is why missed payments are so toxic. The system does not reward near perfection the way a school teacher does. 97% on time sounds wonderful in a classroom in credit. It can feel like a confession. One missed payment can do more damage than people realize because the machine is not asking whether you are mostly decent. It is asking whether you behave predictably under obligation. That is why your paycheck routine has to include the minimum payment layer. Every single time. No heroics. No drama, no emotional storytelling. If you owe, you stay current. You do not let forgetfulness turn into late fees, penalty APRs, credit score damage, and years of higher borrowing costs. The cost of sloppiness compounds just as reliably as the return on good investing. It simply compounds in the wrong direction. People like to speak about wealth as though it begins with making great investments. Often it begins with not making stupid administrative mistakes. That is not romantic, but it is true. Now, we arrive at the most disrespected layer in the whole system, the part people call boring right before life proves how stupid they were to neglect it. The buffer layer, the emergency fund, the cash reserve, call it whatever you want. I call it the part of your life where panic goes to die. If you do not have 3 to 6 months of living expenses in boring, liquid, reachable cash, you are not building wealth yet. You are performing stability. There is a difference. Wealth requires margin. Margin requires liquidity. Liquidity requires accepting that some money exists to be available, not impressive. The average person hates this because the buffer layer offers no dopamine. It is not exciting. It does not double overnight. It will not give you a screenshot. It will not make you feel like a genius at dinner. It just sits there in a high-yield savings account doing its quiet job, waiting for the transmission failure, the medical bill, the job loss, the laptop death, the family emergency, the broken appliance, the cracked pipe, the week when life stops behaving. That boring pile of cash is not wasted potential. It is stored breathing room. Most people do not understand how much courage comes from liquid reserves. They think an emergency fund is just about emergencies. It is about posture. You walk into work differently when you know that losing a paycheck does not mean immediate collapse. You handle conflict differently. You negotiate differently. You endure bad luck differently. You recover faster because your whole nervous system is not being forced to translate every disruption into existential threat. That is why I say the buffer layer is not just financial. It is neurological. A person with no buffer makes decisions from compression. A person with a real buffer finally has room to think. Take the same household with $2,700 of monthly necessities. A 3 to 6 month buffer means something like $8,000 to $16,000 in liquid reserves. That sounds large to someone who has never built one. I understand that, but the size is not the point. The point is direction. You are not trying to conjure it in 1 month. You are installing a new layer in the operating system. Every paycheck now knows that some portion of itself is not available for lifestyle because it is being converted into stability. This is the moment many people first experience the difference between worker thinking and owner thinking. Worker thinking asks, what can I still spend? Owner thinking asks, what must this money become before I am allowed to touch the rest? That is a much better question. Now we reach the layer where the operating system stops being defensive and starts becoming offensive. The match engine. This is where your future starts getting paid before your present has time to waste the money. If your employer offers a retirement plan with matching contributions and you are not taking the full match, you are declining free ownership. That is what you are doing. No matter how gently you want to phrase it, people act as though employer match is some optional perk for finance nerds. Number it is the easiest guaranteed return most ordinary workers will ever see. Let us say the company matches 3% and you earn $60,000 a year. You put in $19,800, they put in $93. You just doubled that slice of money on day one. Show me another legal routine, low-friction move available to ordinary workers that does that without requiring brilliance, luck, or insider access. There is not one, yet people skip it all the time because they are trapped in the present. They look at the contribution and see less room this month. They do not look at the match and see stolen future ownership. They call themselves practical while stepping over free equity in their own life. This is why I say financial failure is often not dramatic. It is administrative, it is behavioral, it is repetitive. It is a person who keeps choosing the visible comfort over the invisible compounding. And compounding is a savage judge of delay. If you invest $300 a month starting at age 25 and earn around 8% over a long period, you can arrive around $1 million by 65. Delay that same habit until 35 and you may end up closer to $400,000. 1 decade of hesitation can erase roughly $600,000 of future wealth. That is not a small mistake. That is a life-shaping penalty for waiting until motivation felt stronger. Your future does not care when you felt ready. It responds to when the code began running. That is why the match engine and the retirement contribution layer must be automatic, not aspirational, not occasional, not something you get around to when you finally feel organized. It needs to happen with the same emotional neutrality as your rent payment. The future gets paid because the code says so, not because your mood cooperated. Now let us talk about the layer people either obsess over too much or avoid entirely: debt. Extraction. I do not mean minimum payments here. I mean the active process of getting rid of non-mortgage debt once the core system is running. Credit cards, personal loans, auto imbalances, consumer drag, all the little and large forms of financial friction that convert future labor into present relief at a terrible price. There are 2 common methods, and I do not particularly care which one you choose, so long as you stop pretending you need 1 more month to think about it. The avalanche method attacks the highest interest rate first. That is mathematically elegant. The snowball method attacks the smallest balance first. That is psychologically effective. People argue about which is better as though they are solving war strategy. They are usually just avoiding the more painful truth, which is that both methods work when the person running them has stopped negotiating with his own weakness. I have often respected the snowball more than finance purists do because personal finance is not a spreadsheet competition. It is a behavior management problem. A debt disappearing gives the mind proof. Proof creates momentum. Momentum can be worth more than theoretical optimization if the alternative was drift. So pick one. Then stop discussing your preferences and start deleting obligations. Every debt you remove is more than an interest burden disappearing. It is another process no longer running in the background. Another monthly claim silenced, another open tab closed, another piece of the operating system simplified. That matters more than people admit. Complexity taxes behavior. A cluttered financial life makes discipline harder. A clean financial life makes discipline easier. Rich people often look calm because their systems are light, not because their souls are especially pure. Now, once the match is running, the buffer is building, and the destructive debt is being attacked, the system moves into a more powerful form of ownership. Tax architecture. This is the point where ordinary savers separate themselves from financial sleepwalkers. A Roth retirement account, for example, looks simple until you really understand what it does. You pay tax now, fine. But then the growth can compound tax-free, decades of gains, untouched by future tax on qualified withdrawals. That is not a trick. That is a gift to the disciplined. Yet average people spend more time researching a television than deciding whether they are routing enough of their life into tax advantage compounding. That is because they still think in paycheck terms, not lifetime terms. When you open a taxable brokerage account, the rules change. Short-term gains are treated differently from long-term gains. Hold over a year, and the tax burden is often much lighter than if you turn the account into a little casino. The lesson is not obscure. The system rewards patience more than performance theater. Long-term ownership beats constant motion for most people, not because motion is morally wrong, but because motion leaks taxes, attention, and judgment. The person building wealth slowly is often called boring by the man who will later call himself unlucky. That is the comedy of adulthood. The next layer is the one I respect most because it is where the whole machine either becomes real or remains a collection of good intentions. Automation. You are not going to out-discipline a badly designed life for 30 years. Stop pretending. Willpower is too expensive to use as your primary financial tool. You need willpower to handle people, stress, health, setbacks, noise, disappointment, and the 1,000 ordinary irritations of modern life. If you are also asking it to manually route every paycheck forever, You are building a system that will fail whenever you get tired enough. And you will get tired enough. That is why the operating system must run without requiring you to be noble every 2 weeks. I call this the silent conveyor. Your paycheck lands. It sits for 1 day if that helps timing clear and gives you peace of mind. Then the conveyor starts. Minimum obligations stay current. A set amount moves to savings. If the buffer layer is not full, money goes there first. Contributions route to retirement accounts. Self-employed tax reserves go where they must go. Extra debt payments move according to the system you chose. Investments continue. The machine does not ask how you feel. It does not negotiate with your cravings. It does not care that you had a stressful Wednesday and now believe restaurant food is part of your healing process. It runs. That is why it works. People who build wealth are not always smarter. Often they just remove discussion from the parts of life that are too important to leave open. The silent conveyor is one of those parts. But let me warn you about the trap hidden inside automation, because careless automation is still careless. People set up transfers once and then treat the system like a museum piece. They get a raise and do nothing. They pay off a debt and forget to redirect the old payment. They leave the savings rate where it was when they were poorer. They automate stagnation. That is not a wealth operating system. That is neglect in polite clothing. Your system needs reviews, not daily obsession, not anxiety theater, but periodic audits. When income rises, the code changes. When debt disappears, the code changes. When an emergency fund is complete, the code changes. When rent goes up, a child arrives, a business begins, or an old expense dies, the code changes. Owners update the operating system. Workers let drift write it for them. That is the difference. Now I want to show you the deepest part of this whole matter, because if you miss it, you will still treat the routine as a bunch of money tricks instead of the identity shift it actually is. The paycheck routine is not just a way to save, it is a way to stop being prey. A person without a payday system is vulnerable to every emotional spike. Bad day at work. Purchase fight at home. Purchase bored on a weekend. Purchase advertiser get your attention. Purchase social comparison. Purchase tiny insecurity. Subscription mild convenience. Delivery fee. You are not living. You are being transacted through. Every corporation with a button, an ad, an app, a reminder, a one-click checkout, or a recurring charge gets to take a slice because there is no sovereign code protecting the income once it enters your account. That is what poverty often looks like in modern life. Not only low income, high exposure, too many entities with permission to drain you before your future gets a vote. The payday routine reverses that order. It says the future votes first, security votes first, ownership votes first, dignity votes first, consumption gets what remains after the important layers are funded, not because pleasure is evil, not because life must become joyless, but because consumption is a terrible leader. It is greedy, short-sighted, theatrical, and extremely convincing in the moment. Consumption should never be eliminated. It should simply be demoted. That is the operation. And once you do it long enough, something strange happens. The routine stops feeling restrictive and starts feeling powerful. You open your bank account and do not wonder where your life is going. Your emergency fund is rising, your match is getting captured, your investments are buying future ownership, your debt is shrinking, your credit stays intact, your cash is not being asked to improvise. Your financial life stops being an emotional weather report and starts becoming a machine. I want that for you. Not because a number on a screen is impressive, but because systems change character. A person with a working money operating system starts speaking differently. He says no more easily. She does not need every raise to be visible. He is less desperate. She is less dramatic. He becomes harder to manipulate with status. She becomes harder to frighten with small disruptions. The identity changes because the code changed. This is why I do not buy the phrase "I am just bad with money." That is often a soft way of saying I have never installed a system strong enough to protect me from myself. Fine. Then install one. Your paycheck does not need your personality. It needs your architecture. The code does the heavy lifting. The habit makes the code normal. Time makes the habit powerful. That is how ordinary people quietly move from chaos to compounding and do not miss the harshest truth of all. The earlier you install the code, the less heroism you need later. A 25-year-old who routes money correctly does not need miracles at 45. A 35-year-old who keeps delaying the system may need giant income gains just to recover the lost compounding. That is why every payday you leave ungoverned is not just a missed opportunity. It is a future tax. You will pay for it in smaller balances, weaker buffers, more stress, fewer choices, and a later arrival at freedom. Delay is not neutral. Drift is not neutral. Spending first and hoping to save later is not neutral. These are all votes. They simply vote against your future while pretending not to be decisions. So let me tell you what the real payday routine is in plain language. First, the money enters, and does not get celebrated. Second, the necessity firewall reminds you what must be funded and what has lost the right to call itself essential. Third, the credit gate keeps your obligations current because sloppiness is expensive. Fourth, the buffer layer absorbs its share until panic loses its home inside your life. Fifth, the match engine captures the free money workers are constantly stupid enough to ignore. Sixth, the ownership layer keeps buying future freedom through retirement accounts and broad investments. Seventh, debt extraction keeps tearing down the old claims that were trying to live off your future labor. Eighth, the silent conveyor runs the whole system without asking whether this week you feel disciplined. That is the routine. Not glamorous, not trendy, not viral, but devastatingly effective. And now we get to the real choice. The next time your paycheck lands, will it enter a life where appetite still has root access, or will it enter a system that knows exactly where every dollar must go before your emotions even wake up? That is the line on one side. You keep living as a well-paid assistant to your own impulses. You call yourself busy, you call yourself stressed, you call yourself underpaid, you call yourself unlucky, but the truth is simpler. Your money keeps arriving in an unprotected environment, and unprotected money does what all unprotected assets do. It gets taken on the other side. You build the operating system. You stop asking every dollar for permission. You stop treating payday like relief and start treating it like deployment. You stop letting the present bully the future. You stop making your income repeat the same pointless cycle of appearance, comfort, and disappearance. You finally let the code work. The market will not save you from chaos. A raise will not save you from chaos. A side hustle will not save you from chaos. A bigger paycheck routed through the same broken system just creates a bigger version of the same old poverty. The only thing that changes the outcome is the operating system. So when the money lands, do not ask what you can buy. Ask what you are building. Ask what your necessities truly are. Ask whether your future got paid first. Ask whether your buffer grew. Ask whether your debt shrank. Ask whether your ownership stake in tomorrow increased. Ask whether the machine ran without your emotions getting a vote. And then ask the hardest question of all, if your paycheck keeps entering your account and leaving your life with nothing real to show for it. How much longer are you willing to pretend the problem is the paycheck instead of the code? Because payday is not a reward, it is a test. And every test is already grading the system you chose to run.